A farmer from Illinois went down to the bottom of a dry well searching for water. What he found at the bottom changed his life, his family's life, and left an entire region without explanation. A miracle of the Virgin Mary that began with a statue buried in the mud. But before we continue, leave a comment saying where you are watching from and what time it is there right now. I would love to see how far the miracles of the Virgin Mary are reaching. Do you know that kind of man who wakes up before the sun rises? Not by choice, by necessity. Walter was 58 years old, a third-generation farmer, the same land his great-grandfather bought in 1905, the same house, the same well, more than 120 years of history on that land. At 4 in the morning every day, Walter was already up. Black coffee, no sugar. He looked out the kitchen window at the dark fields while he drank it, thinking about what he had to do, about what he hadn't managed to do, about what he might never manage to do. You know that man who never asks for help? Walter was like that. His father was like that. His grandfather, too. A generation of men who solve their own problems, who look at a challenge and say, "I can handle it," who would rather work twice as hard than admit they need help. When a neighbor offered to help with the harvest, he thanked him and declined. When his children, already adults and living far away, sent money, he sent it back. The transfer returned the very same day. "Save it for yourselves. You'll need it more than I will," Walter would say on the phone. "I don't need help. I need rain." That was the phrase he repeated every time someone tried to help. Margaret, his wife, prayed every day, rosary in hand, an image of the Virgin Mary on the nightstand. 40 years of marriage. She knew every wrinkle on his face, every silence, every sigh of worry that he thought he hid. She never gave up trying to bring Walter to faith. "Come pray with me, Walter." "I'm tired, Margaret. Just one rosary. Tomorrow, maybe." Tomorrow never came. He respected it. Sometimes he stayed silent beside her while she said her evening prayers. But it was more out of love for her than out of faith of his own. Participate? Never. "I believe in what I see, Margaret. In what I plant and harvest, the rest is talk." She didn't argue. After 40 years, she had learned that some battles weren't worth fighting. She just kept praying, for him too, especially for him. Have you ever seen a drought map? Those colorful maps that show the affected regions? Yellow for mild drought, orange for moderate, red for severe, dark red for extreme. More than half the state was in moderate drought, and the region where Walter's farm was, dark red, extreme drought. The kind where you look at the sky every day hoping for a cloud that never comes. Walter's corn was drying on the stalk. Those leaves that should have been green and bright were yellowed, curled, brittle. You ran your hand over them and they crumbled. The soybeans hadn't even germinated properly. Seeds that cost a fortune, thrown into the ground, waiting for rain that never came. 2 consecutive years of lost harvest. 2 years. Do you know what that means for a farmer? It means he spent money on seed, fertilizer, diesel, maintenance, employees, and not a single cent came in. It means debt. The bank called every week, at first polite. "Mr. Harrison, we would like to schedule a meeting to discuss the financing," then insistent. "Mr. Harrison, we need a position," then with veiled threats. "Mr. Harrison, the bank has been very patient, but we need a solution." Walter answered every call, spoke politely, hung up, and stared at the phone as if it were a snake. The agricultural supply vendors had already moved past the calling phase. Now it was lawyers, registered letters arriving in the mail, legal notices, collections with interest and penalties. Walter had a pile of envelopes on the kitchen table that he no longer even opened. He knew what was inside. More demands, more deadlines coming due, more threats. And the workers, that was the hardest part. Walter had to let everyone go, one by one. Men who had worked with him for years, who knew every corner of that land, who knew the right time to plant, the right depth for the seed, the right way to adjust the harvester. He called each one into the office. shook their hand, looked them in the eye, apologized. "I don't have any way to pay you. The drought destroyed everything. When things get better, you'll be the first ones I call. I promise." Some understood. They shook his hand back, wished him good luck, said they would pray for the rain to come. Others left angry, slammed the door, didn't look back. Walter was left alone with a farm that produced nothing, with debts that kept growing, with a sky that wouldn't rain. There wasn't much hope. The farm's well was the oldest in the region. Walter's great-grandfather had dug that well in 1905. It had never run dry. It was almost a local legend. The Harrison well never dries up, until now. Walter went to check it on a Tuesday morning. He threw the bucket down, like he did every day. The rope went down, down, down. The bucket hit stone, dry. For the first time in more than 100 years, the well was completely dry. Walter stood there for about 10 minutes, just staring down into the darkness, into nothing. Late afternoon, the sun setting, that golden end of daylight. Walter was walking around the property, checking the damage. He walked over to the dry well. He stood there looking down, into the darkness. That's when he saw it. On the other side of the well, a woman. Walter blinked, looked again. A woman wrapped in soft light, a light blue mantle covering her head and shoulders. She was beautiful. She radiated peace, standing there, looking at him. The woman didn't say anything. Gently, with majestic movements, she pointed toward the bottom of the well. Walter felt his heart race. His legs grew weak. His mouth went dry. He blinked. When he opened his eyes, there was no one there. The woman had vanished. Walter ran to the other side of the well, looked for footprints, tracks, anything, nothing. The dry ground showed no marks except his own. "I'm working too much," he said out loud. "I'm seeing things." But his hands were shaking when he went back to the house. He didn't tell Margaret. But that night, lying in bed, he couldn't get one question out of his head. Why did she point to the well? Would you tell someone, or would you keep it to yourself, afraid they'd think you'd gone crazy? Walter couldn't forget what he had seen. The woman in blue, the soft light around her, the gesture pointing to the well. Every day he walked past the well and looked to the other side, waiting, searching. Nothing. But the image wouldn't leave his mind. On a Tuesday morning, he woke up and said to Margaret, "I'm going down into the well." Margaret dropped her coffee cup. "Down where, Walter? Into the dry well?" "You're almost 60 years old," Margaret exclaimed. "I need to see if we can dig deeper." "If there's any chance," Walter replied. He didn't tell her about the woman he had seen. He didn't tell her that she had pointed downward. He just said he wanted to check. Margaret looked at him for a long time. She knew her husband. She knew that when he made up his mind, there was no argument that could change it. "All right, I'll help you," Margaret said. Walter spent the morning getting ready. He gathered flashlights, a helmet, gloves. He went to the barn and improvised a winch. He adapted the system to descend into the well. Margaret stayed at the edge, ready to operate the winch when he needed to come back up. She prayed softly. The descent was slow. The well was about 15 meters deep. The walls were made of ancient stone. As Walter went down, the flashlight beam lit the way. The sun was left behind, dark, cold, damp, even though there was no water. When his feet touched the bottom, he looked around with the flashlight. Stone, dry mud, old roots, no water. Walter sighed. It was what he expected. He began examining the walls, looking for any sign of moisture, any crack where water might come through. The flashlight illuminated every corner. That's when the light hit something. In the middle of the dry mud, partially buried, there was an object. Walter crouched down, took off his glove, started digging with his hands. It was a statue, small, about 30 centimeters, covered in dirt. He wiped it with the sleeve of his shirt. The Virgin Mary. An image of the Virgin Mary, old, very old. The serene face, the hands in a prayer position, the blue mantle still visible despite decades buried. How did this end up here? Walter stared at the image for a while. His great-grandfather had been a devout Catholic. Maybe he had placed it there when he dug the well, a blessing, a protection. Or maybe it had fallen from someone a long time ago. There was no way to know. Walter put the statue into the pocket of his jacket and shouted to Margaret to operate the winch. When he showed it to his wife, Margaret brought her hands to her face. "Walter, it's the Virgin Mary," Margaret said, her voice trembling. "I know what it is," Walter replied. Margaret took the statue carefully, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. Her eyes filled with tears. "This is a sign, Walter," Margaret said. He didn't answer. "Don't you see? You went down into a dry well and found the Virgin Mary. That's not a coincidence," she continued. Walter took off his gloves, wiped the dirt from his hands. "It's an old statue, Margaret. My great-grandfather probably put it there when he dug the well. It's not going to pay our debts," Walter replied. She fell silent, hurt maybe, but not surprised. She knew her husband. "Can I keep it?" Margaret asked. "You can," Walter said. Margaret cleaned the statue carefully. Water and soap. A soft cloth. It looked new when she finished. She placed it in the living room, in a little corner near the window. She lit a candle. Walter walked past it at the end of the day and said nothing. Walter couldn't sleep. That had been happening a lot lately. His mind wouldn't shut off. Debts, bank, suppliers, lost harvest, lawyers, notices. An endless cycle of worry that began when he lay down and only stopped when the sun came up. At 2 a.m, he got up, slowly so as not to wake Margaret. She was sleeping on her side, the rosary still in her hand. She had fallen asleep praying again. Walter went out to the porch, sat down in the old rocking chair, the chair his father used to use, worn wood, creaking with every movement. The night was hot. No wind. That dry heat from when it hasn't rained for months. The kind of heat that sticks to your skin, that doesn't let you breathe properly. Walter looked up at the sky. Not a single cloud, just stars. Thousands of stars that were useless when what you need is rain. That's when he felt it, the smell of roses, strong, clear, unmistakable, as if someone had opened a bouquet right beside him, those dark red roses with a powerful fragrance. Walter looked around. Nothing. The porch was empty. Margaret's garden, which used to have flowers of every kind, had dried up along with the crops. There wasn't a single living flower for miles, but the smell was there, real, strong. He stood up, walked across the porch. Walter stopped. He looked at the statue of the Virgin Mary through the window glass. The candle Margaret had lit was already out, but the image was there, illuminated by the faint moonlight. The serene face, the hands in prayer, the blue mantle. The smell of roses was far too strong to be imagination. "I'm going crazy," he murmured. "Worry is driving me crazy." He went back to bed. He didn't tell Margaret. The letter from the bank arrived. It wasn't another collection notice. It was an ultimatum. "Dear Mr. Harrison, we inform you that you have 30 days to regularize the financing situation. Otherwise, we will initiate foreclosure proceedings on the property." In other words, they were going to lose everything. Walter read the letter 3 times, sat down in the kitchen chair, stared at nothing. More than 100 years of history, 3 generations. Everything was going to end because of a drought. Margaret found him like that when she woke up. She read the letter in silence. "Walter," Margaret began. "Don't say anything, Margaret," Walter cut her off. "We can—" she tried. "Can what? Sell what?" "We don't have anything left. The equipment is old. The land is worthless without water." "It's over," Walter said. She sat down beside him, took his hand. "Let's pray together," Margaret asked. He pulled his hand away. "Prayer doesn't pay debts," Walter replied. "Walter, please." Margaret insisted. "I need water, Margaret, not prayer," Walter said. He left, slammed the truck door, drove aimlessly for hours. When he came back, it was night. Margaret was in the living room praying the rosary, the statue of the Virgin Mary in front of her. Walter walked straight to the bedroom. They didn't speak for the rest of the week. There were 15 days left before the bank's deadline. Walter had tried everything. He went to other banks to try to renegotiate the debt. They refused. He went to finance companies. They refused, too. Everyone knew the drought had made the farm unproductive. No one wanted to lend money to someone who had no way to pay it back. He tried to sell the equipment. They offered less than half its value. There was no way out. On a Thursday night, Margaret went to bed earlier. She was exhausted, sad. Their marriage had been wrapped in a heavy silence for weeks. Walter stayed in the living room, alone, staring at the statue of the Virgin Mary, that image he had pulled from the bottom of the dry well, that his wife had cleaned and placed there, that he had ignored for weeks. The smell of roses returned, faint at first, then stronger. Walter closed his eyes, and for the first time in many years, he cried. Just tears running down the tired face of a man who had spent his entire life trying to solve everything on his own. "I don't know what to do." His voice was a whisper. "I don't know what to do anymore." He didn't know if he was speaking to himself, to the statue, to God. It didn't matter. All my life I tried to handle everything. I never asked for help, never depended on anyone. And now I'm losing everything. My great-grandfather's land, the house where I was born, everything. Silence. If you exist, if what I saw was real, I need help. I can't do this alone anymore. Walter stayed there for a long time. He didn't know how long. When he finally stood up, the tears had dried. He went to the bedroom, lay down beside Margaret. She was asleep, but she stirred when she felt him get in. "Walter?" Margaret murmured sleepily. "I'm here," Walter replied softly. "Are you okay?" she asked. He took a moment to answer. "No, but I will be," Walter said. It was the first time in weeks they slept, holding each other. The next morning, Walter woke up with an idea. Or maybe it wasn't an idea. Maybe it was a certainty. Something that had formed during the night, while he slept. The woman had pointed to the well. That was what he couldn't get out of his head. It wasn't a random apparition. It wasn't a dream. She pointed to the well for a reason. "I'm going to dig deeper," Walter said during breakfast. Margaret looked at him over her cup. "What?" Margaret asked. "The well. I'm going to dig deeper, right where I found the statue," Walter explained. "Walter, you've already been down there." "There's no water," Margaret said. "I know, but I need to try," Walter replied. She didn't understand, but she saw something different in his eyes, something she hadn't seen in months. Hope. "All right. What do you need?" Margaret asked. Walter spent the morning preparing. He grabbed the pickaxe, the shovel, the buckets. He used the barn's hoist again. Margaret stayed at the edge of the well, praying softly. Walter went down. The bottom of the well was dark and cold. Walter turned on the lanterns. The yellow light illuminated the stone walls. He looked around, remembered the spot where he had found the statue of the Virgin Mary. A mark in the dry mud. The mud had dried even more. He started digging there. Pickaxe. The sound of metal striking dry earth echoed off the walls of the well. Shovel. Scooping loose dirt, throwing it into the bucket. Bucket full. He shouted for Margaret to pull it up. The buckets of dirt went up. He went back down. Slow, brutal work. The kind of work that makes your back ache, your arms burn, sweat pouring even in the cold at the bottom of the well. The first 2 hours led nowhere. Just dry dirt and stone. More dirt, more stone. The hole grew deeper, but there was no sign of anything other than more dryness. Walter stopped to rest. Drank some water. Looked up at the circle of light that was the opening of the well. "Everything okay down there?" Margaret shouted. "I'm okay," Walter replied. "Find anything?" she asked. "Not yet," Walter said. Silence. Walter shook his head, but he kept going. Another hour. More dirt, more rock. His arms no longer obeyed properly. His hands, even with gloves, were full of blisters. And then the pickaxe struck something different. It wasn't rock. It was softer, darker. Walter crouched down, took off the glove, ran his hand through the dirt. Damp. His heart started racing. He dug faster now. With his hands, ignoring the blisters, ignoring the pain, pulling away dirt, pulling away stone, clearing everything in front of him. And he saw it. A dark stain in the soil. Small, about the size of a coin. Water. Walter stared at it, not believing it, not blinking. A thin thread of water began to emerge. Fine. Almost nothing. A trickle you could barely see, but it was water. "Margaret!" He didn't even recognize his own voice. Hoarse, desperate, hopeful. "What is it? Are you okay? Did you hurt yourself?" Margaret asked, worried. "There's water! There's water here!" Walter shouted. Silence. Then he heard a sound he hadn't heard in a long time. Margaret laughing and crying at the same time. It didn't happen all at once. It happened little by little. On the first day, it was just a damp spot on the ground. Walter stood there watching. That moisture coming up from the soil, slowly, very slowly, but coming. A patch of water. It didn't look like much, but it was everything. On the second day, the spot had grown. Water was bubbling up from the ground. On the third day, there was already a puddle at the bottom of the well. Walter didn't tell anyone except Margaret. He didn't want to create expectations. He didn't want to seem crazy. But every morning he checked the well, to make sure it wasn't an illusion, that the water was still there. It was. The well kept filling, little by little. First 2 meters of water. You could see it shining down there when you shined a flashlight. Walter stood at the edge of the well for a while that day, just looking. Margaret beside him. The water kept rising. It reached almost 5 meters. Walter managed to keep his crops alive with the water coming from the well. With time, the rain finally arrived in the region. The meteorologists had predicted it. A cold front coming from the north bringing moisture. Normal for the season. Late, but normal. With the rain and the well water, Walter's farm began to recover. Coincidence? Maybe. But a lot had happened, one thing after another. In that exact order, at that exact moment. Too much coincidence to be just coincidence. There were 3 days left before the deadline. Walter went to the bank, asked for a meeting with the manager. "Mr. Harrison, you know we're at the deadline." "If there is no regularization," the manager began. "I know, that's why I came." "I want to show you something," Walter said. Walter showed photos of the well full of water, showed receipts from the small harvest he had managed to produce and had already sold to the processing plant. The farm was becoming productive again. "The farm is going to produce again. The water is back. I've already done a small harvest and sold it. I just need more time," Walter explained. The manager looked at the photos, looked at Walter, thought. "Mr. Harrison, the bank doesn't usually—" the manager began. "I know what the bank usually does," Walter interrupted. "But you know as well as I do that a productive farm is worth more than a foreclosed one. If you take my land now, you'll have to sell it at drought prices. If you give me more time, I'll pay everything, with interest." Silence. The manager drummed his fingers on the desk. "I'll need to consult the board," the manager said. The answer came quickly. Deadline extended, debt restructured, interest renegotiated. It wasn't forgiveness. Walter would have to work very hard to pay everything, but it was a chance. The farm was different. You know when you look at a place and feel that the energy has changed? It's just different. The air feels lighter. The colors seem more vivid. Walter's farm was like that. The cornfield, replanted after the rains, grew green and strong. Row after row of corn swaying in the wind. That bright green that only healthy crops have. The soybeans had sprouted, finally. After 2 years of trying, there was finally soy growing in that land. It wouldn't be the best harvest of Walter's life. Far from it. It had started late. Time had been lost. The soil was still recovering, but it would be enough. Enough to pay the bills. Enough to keep the farm. Enough to have hope again. The well remained full. Every morning Walter went to check it. He didn't need to anymore. The automatic pump did the work, but he went anyway, looked down, saw the water shining, and smiled. The water never dried up again. And Walter was different too. On Sunday morning, he woke up early, as always, had coffee. But instead of going straight to the fields, he went to the bedroom, opened the closet, took out a dress shirt he hadn't worn in years, light blue. It still fit. Margaret looked at him, confused. "Where are you going?" Margaret asked. "To Mass. Want to come with me?" Walter replied. She stood there for about 10 seconds. Processing. Had she heard that right? "What?" Margaret asked, surprised. "Mass, Margaret. That thing you've invited me to every Sunday for 40 years. I thought I'd go today. If you want to come with me," Walter said. She smiled, one of those smiles that change an entire face. That light up. That take 20 years off a person. "I'll get ready," Margaret said. It wasn't a dramatic conversion. But he was open. When Margaret prayed the rosary at night, he sat beside her, sometimes in silence, just keeping her company, sometimes repeating the words along with her, softly, a little awkwardly, but repeating. When the children called, he talked more, asked about their lives, about the grandchildren, about work, talked about the farm without complaining. "Things are getting better here. The rain came. The well is full." "We're going to have a harvest this year," Walter told the children on the phone. The children found it strange at first. The father who barely spoke on the phone now wanted to know everything. But they got used to it, and they liked it. The neighbors noticed. "Walter is different," the neighbors said to each other. "Calmer, lighter." And he was. The harvest came. It wasn't record-breaking, but it was good. Good enough to pay the first installment to the bank. Good enough to settle with suppliers. Good enough to rehire 2 of the workers Walter had let go. The farm was alive again. One autumn afternoon, Walter was sitting on the porch, the same porch where he had smelled roses for the first time. The sun was setting on the horizon, painting the sky orange. Margaret came and sat beside him. "What are you thinking about?" Margaret asked. Walter took a while to answer. "That day, when I went down into the well and found the statue," Walter said. "And?" Margaret asked. "If I hadn't gone down that day, if I had ignored it, would the water still have appeared?" Walter wondered. Margaret smiled. "What do you think?" she asked. Walter looked at the horizon, at the green fields, at the well that never dried up again. "I think there are some things we can't explain, and that it's okay not to explain them," Walter replied. She took his hand. "Yes, it's okay," Margaret said. Every morning before the sun rose, Walter went to the well. He went there to give thanks. He stayed there for about 5 minutes, looking down, at the place where he had found the statue. The statue was now on an altar Margaret had made in the living room, fresh flowers every day, a candle always lit. Walter never told anyone about the woman in blue he had seen that afternoon. He kept it to himself. But sometimes, when he passed by the statue, he smiled. That smile of someone who knows something that doesn't need to be shared. "I don't know what really happened," Walter said to Margaret one night. "I don't know if it was a miracle. I don't know if it was luck. I don't know if it was coincidence." "And what do you think it was?" Margaret asked. Walter thought for a moment. "I think it was a reminder that we don't have to carry everything alone. That sometimes asking for help is the bravest thing we can do," Walter replied. Margaret nodded. "And you learned that from a statue at the bottom of a dry well," Margaret said. "Yes, funny how things work, right?" Walter said. They sat in silence. That comfortable silence of people who don't need words. Outside it began to rain again. A light rain, gentle, the kind that's good for the land. Walter looked at the window and smiled. Before finishing, I want to invite you to be part of our prayer community for the Virgin Mary. A space of faith and hope where people from all over the world come together to pray and share graces received. If you feel in your heart the desire to be part of this chain of prayer, click below and become a member of the channel today, and come pray with us. And look, if you made it this far, to the very end of Walter's story, do one thing for me. Write water in the comments. I want to see how many hearts this story truly reached. And every time I read water in the comments, I'll know that one more person believes that the miracles of the Virgin Mary still happen. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. Write in the comments about a miracle you have witnessed or experienced, and share this video with someone who needs to renew their hope today. May the Virgin Mary continue to bless and protect you and your family. Amen.